A crystal chandelier filled the grand ballroom with warm golden light as a magnificent three-tier birthday cake stood untouched in the center of the room. Every chair had been perfectly arranged, every glass sparkled, every invitation had been accepted. Yet, when the clock struck 7, the silence became impossible to ignore. Not a single guest walked through the doors. At the front of the empty ballroom sat a beautiful young CEO in a wheelchair, dressed in an elegant navy blue evening gown, staring at hundreds of empty seats. She had built a billion-dollar technology empire before turning 40. But on the one night she wanted to feel loved instead of admired, everyone abandoned her. The executives who praised her success were gone. The friends who once called her family never came. Even the people who had promised they would celebrate beside her disappeared without a single explanation. Then, just as she lowered her head to hide the tears filling her eyes, the massive ballroom doors slowly opened. A poor black single father, wearing a faded delivery uniform with an old backpack hanging from his shoulder, quietly walked inside while holding his 12-year-old daughter's hand. They carried no expensive gift, only a small handmade birthday card wrapped in colorful paper. They had never met the lonely CEO. They had never been invited. But within the next few minutes, this ordinary father would do something so unexpected that every hotel employee would stop working, and the paralyzed billionaire would discover that the greatest birthday gift never comes from the richest people in the room. It comes from the kindest heart. What happened after that little girl placed her handmade birthday card into the CEO's hands changed both of their lives forever, and proved that sometimes God sends the right people into your life only after everyone else has walked away. The grand ballroom of the Royal Crest Hotel had never looked more beautiful. Crystal chandeliers poured warm golden light across polished marble floors, while elegant white roses surrounded a magnificent three-tier birthday cake standing proudly at the center of the room. Every table had been decorated with expensive silverware, crystal glasses, and fresh flowers imported from overseas. Soft piano music floated through the air, but instead of creating joy, it only made the silence feel heavier. At the center of the ballroom sat Emma Lawson, a 38-year-old CEO whose name was known across the country. She rested quietly in her sleek black wheelchair, wearing an elegant navy blue evening gown that had been specially designed for her birthday celebration. Her long chestnut brown hair framed a face that still carried both confidence and quiet sadness. Every few seconds, she looked toward the enormous ballroom doors, hoping they would finally open. They never did. The digital clock above the entrance quietly changed from 6:59 to 7 o'clock. Still no footsteps, still no laughter, still no guests. The waiters exchanged uncomfortable glances as they stood beside trays of untouched food. The musicians slowly lowered their instruments, realizing there would be no audience to perform for. Even the photographers packed away their cameras without taking a single picture. Emma forced herself to smile. "It doesn't matter," she whispered softly, though deep inside she knew it did. Only 2 years earlier, people had fought for the chance to stand beside her. She had built one of the largest technology companies in the country before reaching the age of 40. Newspapers called her the woman who changed the future of business. Television channels requested interviews every week. Investors trusted every decision she made, and thousands of employees admired her fearless leadership. Then one rainy evening changed everything. A speeding truck lost control on a slippery highway and crashed directly into her car. Doctors saved her life, but they couldn't save her ability to walk. The injury to her spine left her permanently paralyzed. The physical pain slowly faded with months of treatment, but the emotional wounds became even deeper. Friends who once visited every weekend suddenly became too busy. Business partners who had called every day now sent only formal emails. Some people looked at her with pity instead of respect. Others quietly disappeared from her life without saying goodbye. Emma refused to surrender. She returned to work in her wheelchair, leading meetings with the same confidence she had before the accident. She proved every critic wrong as her company reached record-breaking success once again. Yet birthdays were different. They reminded her of the family she had lost, the friendships that had faded, and the simple happiness she once believed would never disappear. Her personal assistant, Rachel, had spent weeks organizing this celebration. Nearly 300 invitations had been sent to executives, celebrities, politicians, longtime friends, and business partners. Almost everyone had accepted. For the first time since her accident, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe this birthday would feel different. Maybe people still cared. Maybe they weren't coming because she was a billionaire. Maybe they were coming because they loved her. But by late afternoon, the cancellations began. One guest claimed a business emergency, another blamed a delayed flight. Someone else suddenly became sick. Others never even bothered to explain. By 6:30, every single guest had cancelled. Rachel stood silently beside her, holding a phone that refused to stop vibrating with excuse after excuse. She wanted to say something comforting, but no words seemed enough. Emma slowly looked around the magnificent ballroom. Hundreds of beautifully decorated chairs, hundreds of empty seats. For the first time in years, she questioned whether anyone had ever truly cared about her or whether they had only cared about the powerful CEO she used to be. As tears quietly filled her eyes, she had no idea that, across the city, a hard-working black single father was finishing his final delivery of the day, and within the next hour, one simple act of kindness from a complete stranger would change her life forever. Across the city, the evening looked nothing like the luxury inside the Royal Crest Hotel. Old apartment buildings lined the streets as delivery vans hurried through heavy traffic, trying to complete their final routes before nightfall. Inside one of those aging white vans sat Daniel Carter, a 36-year-old black single father whose tired eyes revealed years of sacrifice. His faded blue delivery uniform had been washed so many times that its original color had almost disappeared. His work boots were worn, and an old backpack rested beside him on the passenger seat. Daniel checked the time, 7:08 p.m., his final delivery. After that, he could finally take his daughter home. Beside him sat 12-year-old Lily, quietly finishing her homework inside a small notebook balanced on her knees. Ever since her mother's death 4 years earlier, she had become Daniel's entire world. Whenever school ended early, she rode with him during his last few deliveries so they could spend a little more time together. Their lives were far from easy. Some weeks Daniel worked nearly 14 hours a day just to keep a roof over their heads. He skipped meals whenever money became tight and often repaired old clothes instead of buying new ones. But Lily rarely noticed. Whenever she asked why he wasn't eating dinner, Daniel simply smiled. "I'm still full from lunch." It was the same gentle lie he had told hundreds of times. He always made sure his daughter ate first. 4 years earlier, inside a quiet hospital room, Daniel had held his wife's hand as cancer slowly stole the last of her strength. With tears in her eyes, she had whispered one final request. "No matter what happens, promise me Lily will never feel alone." Daniel had made that promise without hesitation. Every day since then, he had lived for nothing except keeping it. Despite their struggles, their tiny apartment was filled with laughter. Friday nights meant homemade popcorn and old movies. Birthdays meant homemade cakes, even if they were small. Every evening ended with the same lesson Grace had always taught them. Kindness costs nothing, but it can change someone's whole life. Those words had become the foundation of Lily's life. She believed them completely. As Daniel parked outside the Royal Crest Hotel, he picked up the final package and smiled at his daughter. "I'll only be a few minutes. I'll be right here," Lily replied with a cheerful smile. Daniel entered through the employee entrance, greeting several hotel workers who recognized him from previous deliveries. Something immediately felt strange. Luxury hotels were usually alive with conversation and celebration. Tonight, the hallways were almost silent. Several waiters carried untouched trays of expensive food back toward the kitchen. Fresh flower arrangements were already being removed. Musicians packed away their instruments without performing a single song. Even the photographers looked disappointed as they folded their equipment. Daniel frowned. "What happened?" he quietly asked one of the chefs pushing an entire cart filled with untouched desserts. The chef sighed. Birthday party? Daniel looked around. Already finished? The chef shook his head. It never really started. Daniel's eyes followed the chef's gaze toward the grand ballroom. Curious, he slowly walked closer. Through the partially opened doors, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. A breathtaking ballroom, hundreds of perfectly decorated tables, an enormous birthday cake glowing beneath crystal chandeliers, rows and rows of empty chairs, and in the middle of all that beauty, a woman sitting completely alone in a wheelchair. She wasn't looking at the cake. She wasn't looking at the decorations. She was simply staring at the empty seats with quiet tears rolling down her face. Daniel felt his heart sink. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know her name, but he knew that look. It was the same expression he had seen on Lily's face during her first birthday after losing her mother. That lonely silence. No child should feel it. No adult should either. What happened? Daniel asked softly. The chef looked down. Nearly 300 guests accepted the invitation. And they all cancelled. Daniel looked back toward the woman. All of them? The chef nodded. Every single one. For several long seconds, Daniel couldn't move. He watched as one waiter quietly removed untouched plates from a nearby table. Another employee blew out candles that had been burning for guests who never arrived. The enormous ballroom suddenly felt far colder than the rainy streets outside. Daniel completed his delivery and signed the paperwork. Normally, he would have walked straight back to his van. Instead, his feet refused to move. He looked once more toward the lonely woman. Something inside him wouldn't let him leave. He remembered every lonely night after Grace passed away. He remembered watching Lily cry herself to sleep. He remembered how one kind neighbor had unexpectedly brought them dinner without asking for anything in return. That simple act had carried them through one of the darkest weeks of their lives. Kindness. His wife had always believed it changed everything. Maybe tonight it could again. Daniel slowly approached the hotel manager. "Excuse me, sir." The manager looked exhausted. "Yes?" Daniel hesitated for a moment. "I know this sounds unusual, but would it be all right if my daughter and I wished her a happy birthday?" The manager blinked in surprise. "You know her?" Daniel smiled gently. "No." "Then why?" Daniel glanced toward the ballroom. "Because no one deserves to spend their birthday completely alone." The manager looked at Daniel's faded uniform, worn boots, and old backpack. Then he looked through the ballroom doors at the lonely CEO. A slow smile appeared on his face. "I think she'd like that." Daniel thanked him and hurried back outside. Lily looked up as he opened the van door. "Dad?" He held out his hand. "Come with me." "Where are we going?" Daniel smiled warmly. "To make sure someone smiles before this night ends." Lily didn't ask another question. She reached into her school bag and carefully pulled out a small handmade birthday card she had created during lunch break weeks earlier, hoping to use it for a class project. Bright crayons covered the front with colorful balloons and sunshine. Inside, she had written only one sentence: "Nobody deserves to feel forgotten." Daniel looked at the card and smiled. It couldn't be more perfect. Holding her father's hand tightly, Lily walked beside him toward the grand ballroom. The heavy wooden doors slowly opened. Emma Lawson lifted her tear-filled eyes. For the first time that entire evening, someone had finally come. The heavy wooden doors opened slowly, and every pair of eyes inside the ballroom turned toward the entrance. Emma Lawson looked up, expecting perhaps another hotel employee. Instead, she saw a tired black single father standing quietly beside his young daughter. The man wore a faded delivery uniform, worn work boots, and carried an old backpack over one shoulder. The little girl beside him held a colorful handmade card with both hands, as if it were the most valuable gift in the world. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. Daniel smiled politely before taking a few careful steps forward. "I'm sorry for interrupting," he said gently. "We weren't invited." Emma looked at him with surprise but remained silent. "I was making my last delivery here tonight," Daniel continued. "One of the staff members told me it was your birthday." He paused for a moment before speaking again. "I just couldn't leave knowing someone was spending their birthday alone." Emma felt her throat tighten. No billionaire, no famous politician, no lifelong friend had walked through those doors. Instead, a complete stranger had come. Lily slowly stepped forward. She looked slightly nervous but smiled warmly. "Happy birthday," she whispered. She carefully handed the colorful card to Emma. The expensive ballroom suddenly felt incredibly small. Emma accepted the handmade card with trembling hands. The front showed 3 smiling people standing around a birthday cake beneath a bright blue sky. It wasn't perfect. The lines were uneven. The colors crossed outside the edges. But somehow, it was the most beautiful birthday card Emma had ever received. She slowly opened it. Inside, written in careful handwriting, were only 5 words. "Nobody deserves to feel forgotten." Emma stopped reading. Tears instantly filled her eyes. She covered her mouth as she struggled to breathe. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself to cry. Not because she had been abandoned, but because someone she had never met cared enough to walk through those doors. Daniel lowered his eyes respectfully. "I know we're strangers, but birthdays shouldn't be spent alone." Emma looked at him for several long seconds before softly asking, "What is your name?" "Daniel. And this beautiful young lady?" "My daughter, Lily." Emma smiled through her tears. "Thank you." Those 2 simple words carried more emotion than any speech she had ever given. From across the ballroom, several hotel employees quietly watched the scene unfold. One waitress wiped tears from her face. A young chef slowly removed his apron. The pianist looked toward the silent piano. Without saying a word to anyone, he walked back to his seat. His fingers gently touched the keys. A soft version of Happy Birthday filled the ballroom. Everyone turned. One by one, hotel employees stopped working. The waiters placed serving trays back onto the tables. The chefs returned carrying warm meals that had never been served. Housekeepers stepped into the ballroom. Security guards quietly joined them near the entrance. Even the hotel manager removed his jacket and stood beside the staff. No one had planned this. No one had been asked. It simply happened. One waitress carefully relit the birthday candles. Their warm glow reflected in Emma's tear-filled eyes. The manager smiled gently. "I think it's time someone finally sings." The staff looked at one another. Then together they began singing. "Happy birthday to you." The voices weren't perfect. Some sang off-key. Some laughed while singing. Others cried. But for Emma, it was the most beautiful birthday song she had ever heard. She closed her eyes for a moment. Not because she wanted to make a wish, but because she wanted to remember this feeling forever. When the song ended, everyone applauded. The once empty ballroom suddenly echoed with laughter instead of silence. The expensive decorations no longer seemed important. The people inside did. One of the chefs wheeled the enormous birthday cake toward Emma. Lily smiled excitedly. "You have to blow out the candles." Emma laughed softly. "I haven't done that in years." Daniel smiled. "I think tonight is a good night to start again." Emma looked around the ballroom. Just an hour earlier, hundreds of chairs had reminded her of everyone who had abandoned her. Now, she barely noticed the empty seats, because the people who truly mattered were standing beside her. She closed her eyes, made a quiet wish, and gently blew out every candle. The ballroom erupted into applause. Lily clapped louder than anyone. Daniel smiled proudly at his daughter. As slices of cake were served, everyone gathered around the same tables. Nobody cared about job titles anymore. The CEO sat beside a delivery driver. Chefs laughed with security guards. Housekeepers shared stories with managers. For the first time in a very long time, Emma wasn't surrounded by powerful people. She was surrounded by good people. Looking at Daniel, she quietly asked, What made you stop tonight? Daniel looked at Lily before answering. My wife used to tell us something. He smiled gently. Kindness only matters when it's given to someone who can never repay you. Emma looked down at the birthday card, still resting in her lap. At that moment, she realized something that years of business success had never taught her. The richest hearts were rarely found in the richest rooms, and before the night came to an end, she would make a decision that would change Daniel and Lily's lives forever. The laughter inside the ballroom continued long after the birthday cake had been served. For the first time in years, Emma Lawson no longer noticed the empty chairs surrounding the room. Her attention remained on the small group of ordinary people who had turned one of the worst nights of her life into one she would never forget. Daniel sat quietly beside his daughter, never trying to draw attention to himself. He spoke with the hotel staff as if they had known each other for years, while Lily laughed happily with the chefs who insisted she taste every dessert they had prepared. Emma watched them in silence. She had spent years attending exclusive business dinners with billionaires, politicians, and celebrities. Those evenings had been filled with expensive conversations, but very little sincerity. Tonight was different. The people surrounding her had no wealth to impress her with. They simply had kind hearts. As the evening slowly came to an end, Daniel stood up and looked at his watch. We should probably get going, he said politely. Lily has school tomorrow morning. Emma looked surprised. So soon? Daniel smiled. We've already stayed longer than we expected. Lily carefully walked over to Emma and gave her a gentle hug. I hope next year you won't be alone, she whispered. Emma could barely hold back her tears. I don't think I ever will be again. Before leaving, Daniel picked up his old backpack and thanked every member of the hotel staff for allowing them to stay. As he and Lily reached the ballroom doors, Emma suddenly spoke. Daniel, he turned around. Would you come by my office on Monday morning? Daniel looked confused. If there's anything I need to pay for tonight, I'm afraid I can't. Emma smiled and shook her head. You've already given me something money could never buy. I'd just like to talk. Daniel nodded politely. If you think I can help in any way, I'll be there. The following Monday, Daniel arrived at Emma's company headquarters, wearing the same clean but faded delivery uniform. The enormous glass building made him feel completely out of place. Employees hurried through the lobby, carrying laptops and expensive briefcases. Daniel quietly waited, expecting the meeting to last only a few minutes. Instead, Emma personally came downstairs to greet him. She smiled the moment she saw him. I'm glad you came. Inside her office, Daniel noticed Lily's handmade birthday card, standing in a beautiful frame on Emma's desk. You kept it, he said softly. Emma looked at the card and smiled. It reminds me what leadership is really supposed to look like. She invited Daniel to sit down. I spent the entire weekend thinking about Friday night. Daniel remained silent. Emma continued. I've spent years building a successful company, but one ordinary father taught me more about humanity in a single evening than I learned in 20 years of business. She opened a folder lying on her desk. I've decided to create a new foundation. Daniel looked surprised. It will support single parents, children who have lost a parent, caregivers, and people rebuilding their lives after life-changing injuries. She paused. I want to call it the Empty Chair Foundation. Daniel smiled quietly. Emma looked directly into his eyes. And I'd like you to lead our community outreach program. Daniel stared at her in complete disbelief. Me? I don't have a business degree. I've never managed a foundation. Emma smiled gently. I already know something much more valuable. You know how to care about people. Daniel lowered his eyes. I don't know if I'm the right person. Emma nodded. That's exactly why you are. Tears filled Daniel's eyes as he accepted the opportunity. Months passed. The Empty Chair Foundation quickly became one of the country's most respected charities. Thousands of single parents received financial assistance. Children who had lost loved ones found counseling and scholarships. People recovering from serious injuries received equipment and emotional support they couldn't afford. Daniel became the heart of the organization. Every decision he made reflected the same kindness he had shown on that lonely birthday night. Lily often visited the foundation after school, spending time with children who needed a friend. Her handmade birthday card remained hanging inside the main office, where every visitor could read the simple sentence written in colorful crayons: "Nobody deserves to feel forgotten." Those 5 words became the foundation's official motto. Exactly 1 year later, Emma celebrated another birthday inside the same ballroom, but this time the room looked completely different. Every chair was filled, not with celebrities, not with politicians, not with billionaires. Instead, the ballroom welcomed hundreds of families whose lives had been changed by the foundation. Single parents sat beside volunteers. Children laughed together while caregivers shared stories of hope. Hotel employees from the previous year had also been invited as honored guests. At the center of the celebration stood Daniel and Lily. No longer strangers, no longer visitors, they had become family. As everyone gathered around the birthday cake, Emma looked across the crowded ballroom. 1 year earlier, she had believed success meant building a billion-dollar company. Now she understood something far greater. Real success wasn't measured by wealth. It was measured by the number of lives your kindness could touch. She smiled at Daniel. Daniel smiled back. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to, because both of them knew one simple truth. Sometimes, the person who changes your life isn't the richest person in the room. It's the one who refuses to let you face your darkest moment alone. And on a birthday when everyone else walked away, one poor black single father and his little daughter proved that kindness will always arrive, even when the world doesn't.